everyone. Welcome back to the CCO Follow podcast. This is our last and final episode talking about community. Over the course of this month, we have just been blessed talking with different people from different age groups and different walks of life. Just share how they feel about community. And today, this is actually part 2 of a two-parter. Last week, we introduced Finding Community with Talia. And this week, we're actually with Gabriel, and we're going to go through part 2 of that. So, Travis, talk us through, give us a little recap of what we talked about last week.
Yeah, so last week, was on the same topic of finding community. And the reason we emphasized, or what we emphasized in that, is that we aren't meant to simply just have some friends and call it a day. Like, community is deeper, it's more meaningful, it's more vulnerable than average friendships. But also, true community isn't just within your kind of sphere of the people you normally hang out with, whether it be because of age or hobbies, things like that. But it's bigger than that. And so when we see community in scripture, when we see community just even in history, it's pretty unique nowadays, especially because of our Americanized world. We view community as like, oh, it's the 3-4 people you go bowling with, 3-4 people you go watch movies with. It's the people you have specific in common with and age and all kind of stuff. And so with Talia last week, she's in her early 20s. And we talked with her about what was it like to move from Texas to here, to get involved in this church where she didn't know anyone at first, to start meeting people, and more importantly, to start building community that, rather than just hanging out with people from a young adults group, how she's reached out and built friendships with people of different ages. And so we wanted that perspective of someone coming into, our church family community and building community within it. From that vantage point of, young, single girl. And we thought it would be good to also get a different perspective, because the reality is everyone has a different life story as well as just different life situation. And so, the reality is building community to a certain extent, it's all exactly the same for every single person. There's the same kind of steps you need to take, but it can also have different small variants. And so we want to bring Gabriel on today, since he, in the last, has it been 2 years now? 3 years now? 2 years.
Going on 3.
Going on 3 years of being part of this church family community, and a different stage of life, middle-aged, married, male, not female, and just how we all should be following, honestly, these two people's examples, but honestly, the example of Jesus, of just having a variety of ages, variety of, both male and female relationships, that we would be in true community with one another.
And it's a part of it is very, it's a natural thing when we put ourselves into different communities. It's going to be natural that you're not going to just be with somebody you get along with, somebody your age, somebody you share things with. So Travis kind of introduced that. You've been going here for the past 2+ years, almost 3 years now. And what was that like, entering into an established community like the church when you first started coming here?
Well, I really didn't know anyone. So for me, it was just kind of like walking into a door and seeing a crowd of strangers. And I was just like, wow. But at the same time, I felt warmed and I felt welcomed, but it's like, well, how do I get to, I need to know these people. I can't just be the awkward guy sitting on the side. So
how do you bridge that gap from a bunch of strangers, which makes sense, default, you don't know them, to not a bunch of strangers? Like, how do you cross that gap?
So what did you do? How did you cross that gap? Because clearly you have friends now. I know that.
Well, so I just basically really started off with doing just anything that I could. So volunteering. I wanted to, every time I heard any sort of call for a volunteer, like the church announcements, they'd be like, well, we're running low on greeters. And I was like, greeters? I was like, okay, well, I can do greeting. And then, I'm going to be able to see people. And if I don't actually know who they are, at least they see my face and they know, and, smiling, greeting them. So I figured, I would do that. And
that's where you met my wife.
Yeah. Molly.
Yeah. And I think you guys are friends.
Yeah, definitely.
That's interesting. So So I think a lot of this, and we've talked about this in the past podcasts of community, but you're saying something that is really valuable that I think we should key in on, and that's to actively engage.
Yeah.
And it's not, it's different than just coming and sitting and waiting for people to talk to you. And I'm sure they did. I'm sure you had a lot of people come to you and invite you to different things.
Yes.
But on the flip side of that, it was also, no, I'm going to just get involved. I'm going to choose to get involved. I'm going to choose to meet people. And I think that's really healthy. It's a really healthy mindset, because I think oftentimes I hear stories of people who feel hurt because no one's coming in and talking to me. Nobody's, and they feel hurt, and that's a fair response, but it's not. I don't think it's the healthiest response, because a lot of life is us actively seeking it out, and so I really appreciate what you're saying, because especially for somebody who's brand new, who's really kind of a new believer, is coming in, doesn't know anybody, to have the courage to step out and say, I'm going to meet some people, I think is a really cool thing. And we're seeing the fruit from it now too. So that's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the reality is that you could simply just show up every single week and never meet a soul. But by doing something like serving, I mean, a couple things are happening. Like you are showing consistency with people who are also consistent. And so, you may sit in the same rows or different rows each week, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to see the same people and all that kind of stuff. But you also, it's kind of like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but the idea that like a lot of guys, they want to be doing something while they're building a relationship. Like it's way easier to have a conversation if you're throwing football, way easier if you're working on a project together.
Yeah.
And the same thing happens. I mean, when you're serving with other people, you're building common relationships and experiences, and then able to build off of that. So I'm sure you got to meet a lot of people who came through the door, but I'm sure you also got to know, probably even better, the other people who were serving on that team. Even though majority of the serving was welcoming other people, there's still plenty of downtime, and conversations are just naturally going to happen because people hate downtime. And it's a wonderful volunteer. There's really nothing that builds that kind of initial layer of relationship like volunteering, like just simply serving, because you get all those kind of boxes checked where it's like, it's not, you're not awkwardly having to quote unquote choose someone to be with, because you're just paired together. So not your choice. You're actively doing something with them. So that removes a barrier of awkwardness. You simply get time together, shared experience, so many benefits. I mean, obviously we talked about home group a couple weeks ago, and that has an extra like further deepness. But serving and volunteering, there's nothing as easy kind of a first step.
And I'm curious for you, Gabriel, your deepest relationships, your closest friends, how did those come about? How did those relationships come about?
In church?
Yeah, both. Yeah.
Okay.
All of the above.
So
all of the above.
I have an interesting background, because I was in the military for 20 years. So there's a huge brotherhood that comes from serving with. It's in the secular side, serving with somebody does the same sort of thing. It grows. It grows it. So, and even without Jesus being the focal point, it still fosters something, a love for one another. And so I have a lot of friends that are military, and of course that came from doing the secular version of serving. But then here, a lot of it actually came from pretty much the same sort of thing, just serving on a different capacity, serving for the church and doing church events. I think every time that there was anything to like set up for like men's day down at Gary's house, it's like, hey, we need guys to help set up. And, I'd be like, okay, I can show up 30 minutes early and do some tables and whatever you want. So
in addition to like just the time and shared values and stuff like that, I think one of the biggest things, and this is probably what bonds military people so much together, is there's two things. One, like the shared experience is heightened with military, because you don't just have the shared experience of like an 8-hour job. You have the shared experience of, we're sleeping in barracks together. Things. We're doing, and it's just sheer quantity. And then the second one is the difficult things, like the shared, suffering to a certain extent. And absolutely. That can, but like suffering on a really wide scale. Like if you serve with someone let's say for 3 months, you guys are, greeting people at the door, right? But then one time it's insanely just pouring rain, right? And part of your greeting thing is now you're getting umbrellas and running out to help people from their cars into the church. That shared experience is going to be 10 times more valuable than the shared experience of this normal daily thing, because it's unique, because there's like a certain amount of quote unquote suffering and kind of like shared experience in a different way. And just putting in that time, you can't plan for those suffering times to happen. I'm using suffering obviously very, large,
right?
Yeah.
Encompassing so many things. But when you suffer together, it just expands upon that relationship. Some of my deepest relationships have actually been some of the shortest ones. I had a friend call me from Florida just a couple months ago, and we're talking, and I teased him that he called me like third in this list of other people. But as I teased him about it, I'm like, by far I've known you the least out of all these people.
Yeah.
But what bonded us together so much was, I knew of him, but I started really getting to know him 3 weeks before his mom died. And that shared experience and me just being able to be there at that perfect time bonded us together in a way that like so many, like it just hyper, builds relationships. And so that happens with volunteering.
Yeah.
It happens with home groups.
And just to kind of finish the point here, it's funny because I have friends in the church, and they're friends that I've made just because I sit near them or something. But those friends that I do have, it's not as deep as the ones like with Travis and I. Like I don't know if Travis and I would have been. I definitely wouldn't have been as close. And we might not even really know each other had we not worked together. And Travis and I are very different. But it's us working together is what kind of, we have not that suffering, but we've gone through some things
shared
together.
Obstacles.
Yeah.
That's a better way of saying it.
And so it really does. I think that's by God's design. Totally is when you think about family too, you grow closer with your family in those times where it's really tough.
Yeah.
But we're talking about, building those strong relationships, but it's also like Travis was saying in our part one of this 2-part little series here, we talked about, how age really isn't, there's no barrier in friendship with age. And so I'm curious for you, are your relationships that you've built here, do they run the gamut of ages? Are they pretty close?
They're nowhere near close. They're from one end of the spectrum to the next. And I have one friend who's in his 90s, and he talks to me, and he's like, well, I'm just so much older than you. I'm like, yeah, on this side of eternity, you're older than me. But I mean, really, when you think about it so when I started looking at it from like a biblical lens, like that age difference really isn't that big of a difference.
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of the way I approach it. It's kind of like, it's like you're just a little bit further down in your walk, or somebody is a little bit less further down their walk, and it really doesn't mean anything as far as like this side of eternity. And we try to place it into it, but it's only from this side that it really matters.
Yeah.
Age is just a number.
Yeah.
Right.
What about some young people?
Well, I consider you one of my friends.
Yeah. I was baiting you to say that. I was waiting for you to say that.
Okay. Well, touche. There you go.
Yeah.
No, but and I think that a lot of like what our friendship has grown from, it doesn't have anything to do with age. It has to do with, the shared common interest of Jesus, first of all.
Yeah.
And that right there, because for me being a rather newer believer, I'm not like saddened that like it took me so long to come to Jesus, but at the same time, I'm like, there's so much more that I feel like I kind of like squandered some of my time. But then I look at somebody like you, and you've been like submitted to the Lord for way longer than I have. So I've just kind of like, I iron sharpened irons. Like, well, hey, what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? So the shared experience to Jesus, but then, we also have other things that we can.
Totally. And I think just speaking on our friendship, it is really sweet because, you mentioned how, I've been, walking with the Lord. but you've encouraged me in more ways than one of like, wow, this guy, like, if am I really walking with the Lord? This guy's on fire, and I'm kind of cooling off a little bit here. And so you encourage me in different ways. But I love, we often connect, and like I'll be passing through the sanctuary, you'll be doing something in the sanctuary, and then the next 15, 20 minutes goes by, and we're just talking about the Lord and different things He's working in our lives. And I just think we have such a sweet friendship. Just because it really is like it's founded on Jesus. And yeah, I don't see it, you're an older gentleman, but I don't see it. I'm with you. I don't really see it that way. I just think, when Molly, my wife, or, my friends say, oh, who's your friends? Oh yeah, Gabriel. And I don't think they realize, oh, you guys he's in his 50s or 40s, is like, what's the deal here?
Arthur doesn't know what age you are.
And,
so
no, I do.
He does.
But it's just, I think it's really cool. But I'm curious with, you talked about, you have someone in their 90s who you're friends with and who you build relationships with. What are the conversations like? Are they different? Are they the same? What are they like between, myself, you and I versus,
I think a lot of it has to do with like, so you hear a lot of this, and even in secular circles, you hear, "Oh, let's build a community." It's like, so they're always like trying to do it, but they have no foundation. So the foundation is still the same, and it doesn't really matter. So, like, the conversations are really no different. There's like obviously differences in vernaculars that you use.
They don't use the cool slang like
right. They don't use gifts like you do.
Yeah.
Would you so? If the conversations aren't different, how would you say the blessing of the relationship is different? So like of a young 20-year-old versus a 90-year-old versus a 40-year-old, single versus married versus widowed, like how would you say those relationships are a blessing to you in different ways, but then maybe how you're able to be a blessing to them in different ways too?
Yeah, well, I never really put much thought into that actually, but they are rather different because like the I guess just generally the way that I try to help out the older people that I'm friends with is a lot different than the way I try to help out Arthur. So
I know you mowed someone's lawn like a couple months ago and you never once offered to mow my lawn.
Yeah. I don't have a lawn.
I'm just teasing. But that is one practical way you can help someone who's older than you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
and a practical way you helped us was helping us a lot with our house in different ways when I was just had no idea what I was doing, and even gifting me a ladder.
Yeah.
Like that was a very, very practical way.
You fell off that ladder though.
He did later fall off that ladder.
Oh, okay.
I fell off the long
Jeez.
ladder, and that was actually quite painful, but I don't want to talk about that.
What ways would you say the different ages have been blessings to you?
Well, it really depends upon the individual because it seems like each individual person brings a certain different. The perspective is different, and their perspective of how they see what the Lord has done for them is different than somebody who has been walking with the Lord, 40 years as opposed to, 12, 15 years or something like that. So it's, and I think that that has a lot because the perspective, it just changes the dynamic of the conversations and the blessings really.
Well, and it has effect on us. I know, the things that you say to me, you might not ever know, but it has an effect on me, and it gives me, it sets me on, I don't know if it's, when we think of paths, it's not like, we're all going, hopefully we're going to the same direction. Right. It's Jesus. But there's so many different
the narrow gate
areas where we can take different steps, and I just think when we talk with people, like when I talk with Travis, I leave a conversation changed. Like any conversation we have, I think we leave that conversation changed. whether that's just changed from just the simple new existence of knowledge that we didn't have before, or that's like, man, that's a different way of thinking about the same problem that I'm going through. And it changes the way that we are. And I think this is so off topic, but it's been on my mind, so I have to talk about it. I was thinking about growth, and I was having a conversation with one of my friends, Navon, and we spoke for a few hours just over this idea of growth. And I remember being out and in my backyard, and I was watching, the trees change, because fall, and I was thinking to myself, that tree that's in my backyard started from a seed. It looks very different now than it did when it was a seed because it grew. And we all want growth, right? We all want this idea. We want to grow in our relationships. We want to grow in our faith. We want to grow. But that requires change. And I think maybe it's obvious to other people, but for me, it kind of clicked for me. It wasn't as obvious. I didn't really think about it this way, but to grow is to change. And I know for myself, like, I don't want change. Sometimes I don't want change. Change is difficult. Change is, messy. Change is not, it's for somebody who's kind of OCD tendency, change is not the best. But it so is if we want growth. And so I just think about relationships that we have. Any conversation that you and I have, like, there's change that happens and there's growth. And I think, the growth that's what's the constant with relationships, having different people. I'm talking to somebody who's in their 70s versus somebody who's 18,
Right.
That the same thing that happens is the growth, and it's because change happens in those relationships. So that was kind of way out there, but what do you think about that, Travis?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that we talk a lot about how if God is a perfect straight line and we being imperfect people means we have crooked lines. The hope is that every interaction we have, every person in our life would be helping us grow closer and closer to God's straight line.
Yeah.
And ultimately that's the goal of sanctification. That's the goal of even the gospel we see in Titus 2. And so there's that reality that ideally everything in our life God is using, God would desire to use for good, and Satan would desire to use for evil. Yep. And so in our relationships, when we have the intentionality of like, this is me obeying Christ in living in community, every interaction, whether quote unquote good or bad, or neutral, that God can use it for his good purposes. Yeah.
I'm curious. So this is a question for both of you. How we've kind of talked about how, we've gotten the relationships that we have, built them or sought them out, but how have we sought out relationships maybe with people that, let's just take the staff, for example. How have you actively engaged in building relationships with other members of the staff? And same with you, Travis, same question. So how do we engage with the people that are around us on a more frequent basis?
I think one way that I proactively have to always be trying is to not let the things in front of me obscure the person in front of me, or to keep me from getting to a person. There's seasons and everything, but there's definitely been seasons where I realize I have my head down too much, and so I go to someone's office and be like, "Hey, how are things going?" and just try to catch up with them, because so much about relationships won't happen otherwise.
Oh yeah.
Not only because we're working two different ministries, so it's very possible that honestly, outside of staff meetings, it would be possible for us to never see each other.
Talk, yeah.
And staff meetings, oftentimes aren't about like, tell me about your kids, and stuff like that. And so if there's going to be actual, unity and camaraderie and relationship building, it has to be done at some point. And it's not going to be at the standard work times if you don't practically make it so.
Yep. That's so good.
I think that it's the same intentional opportunities that I was looking for are the same ones that I seek out kind of like on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
So like if I see like a moment where like there's kind of like a lull in the work and it's like, whoa, there's Travis. It's like, well, let me go engage Travis and see what he's got. And, I'll ask him a few things and just try to engage and just get to be involved.
Yeah.
Because of the nature of your work, you're passing by offices a lot more naturally than like I am. And I've noticed that like there will be, you pass by basically at least once a day, and it's not every day. But a lot of days you'll just take the opportunity to pause. Sometimes there was another reason, but oftentimes it was just,
I feel like this is the reason why I kind of brought this up is because there's one thing in saying, okay, I'm going to seek out people and seek out serving. But even when we're serving, I think I just think of the end. Like God wants good relationships. He wants us to have relationships. So if God wants it, the enemy does not want it.
Yeah.
And I think the enemy will often just say, okay, you might be in each other's lives now, but I'm just going to distract you with busyness.
Yeah.
And that's what Travis and you guys are both saying is I think it's super key to really be aware. And I'm so guilty of this all the time where it's work. I'll just come to Travis because I'm not trying to talk to Travis. I'm trying to talk about work stuff.
Yeah.
And it's, sure, some of that's valuable, but you can't build a relationship like that. If you and my wife on greeting team chose just to say hi as the greeters and that was it, yeah, you'd be on the greeting team together, but you wouldn't
know each other's names.
Yeah,
and
you
you
know
would,
each other, but you wouldn't have the same relationship that you have now. She loves you. You're like her, a second dad in a lot of ways for her. And so I just think that's the second piece to this puzzle is like, so let's seek out areas where we can serve with one another and volunteer and do all these things, but also we have to seek out and be intentional about actually talking to someone in a way that it goes beyond yourself or what you're working on, but like it really reaches them. So I really appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, it's your favorite word from the last 2 months, intentional.
Intentional, yeah.
And kind of another layer of how that that relationship deepens and changes is that I've seen this multiple times, and I thought I heard someone once say like this is the way it always is, but I have been part of many newlywed marriage games where like, you're with a group of people and for one reason or another, the icebreaker they decided if it's a bunch of spouses is they play the newlywed marriage game where it's essentially a bunch of superficial questions and how well do you know your spouse or significant other.
Yeah.
And so, it's questions like what's their favorite, what car would they have? They got $1 million, what would they do if whatever. and the newlyweds or recently engaged always win. And those who have married forever never win. And I'm sure there's exceptions, but in general, the longer you are together, the less and less you really focus on like the
surfacey things.
Yeah, and let me just memorize these things about you. And not saying that's bad, especially beginning of relationships. That's how they start, but that's not where they go when they stay together.
Yeah.
So I mean, you mentioned Gabriel about the like in workplace, but what about outside of workplace, like at the greater CCO family, greater Christian community? How do you build relationships? How have you built relationships with young people versus older people? So like how did the initiation, how was that different? How has the relationship been different? Like do you just approach them literally the same, just be like, hey, how you doing? Or was it with one age, maybe you served, with the other age you did something else and that caused the relationship to start? Like what has caused them to start and then to flourish?
The icebreaker is always a little bit different. The thing that actually starts the conversation, and I've heard it more than once, said like, I just started a conversation a long time ago and the conversation's kind of continued and it's just kind of like, you just started a conversation and then once you get past that icebreaker, it's just like you continue that conversation.
Yeah.
So, it hasn't been like the content is not that varied. It's just because you just find out what interests that person. And if you have a similar inkling to that interest, it's like, okay, well, we both like this. And it's like, well, we'll just talk about that. Or you find the common ground, and then you just go from there and just get to learn more about them. So,
Yeah. I ask as a kind of leading question in that way because I already had an answer for you. In that,
yay for failing.
No, it's something you wouldn't know, but I want to see from your perspective what that was like because I've seen it many times with younger people. Personally, I'm always looking for people who are doing that well because, previously as a high school youth pastor and also just having a passion for younger people and older people to connect. I always look for older people who are doing that well. Not that the onus are on whoever's older, but in the Bible it does talk about how those who are mature should give up and sacrifice for those who are immature. And for those who are older, the younger generation are the ones transitioning, and we're the ones not. And so it's good for us to help them and to reach out to them. And I've seen you do that time and time again with people like Jacob Oates, people like just a lot of people in the high school, in the adults group, and talking to the interns as we were discussing the where these different episodes for this month would go. I asked them, like, who have you seen do extremely well who's older than me, because that's what it qualifies to be old, and who has just done really well in this. And unanimously they mentioned your name. And a couple of them one said that you always say hello by name, that meant a lot to them. That that they felt seen, and especially for a young person, if you feel seen by an older person, I know that's what has really drawn me to people like Gary Thomas. He makes you feel seen, and whether you are a child or a 18-year-old or one of his peers.
I am so surprised that he even remembers my name. And what you're saying, it makes an impact for sure.
And then also, one thing the interns had to say specifically about you, Gabriel, was that you made them feel like a peer, not like a child. And even if people are children, you can still make them feel not like a peer necessarily in the sense of like there's a certain amount of respect or things like that, but feel like I'm a person, you're a person. And to get on their level, whatever level that is, and to make them feel seen, to make them feel like you're not looking down on them, that you're not just judging every single little thing they do. You're very gracious with people who are younger than you, and just very encouraging. And not that was the answer I was looking for, but I wanted people to be able to see, okay, from Gabriel, your perspective, you are just doing the same thing. You're trying to love people. You're just trying to have an icebreaker conversation, and it goes a certain direction. But just those little steps where you're trying to treat everyone the same means a lot to people who are younger than you.
And I'm curious, I think I feel like there's something to this, but I think this is more of a subconscious thing that you do. I don't know if it's super maybe it is in part, but I'm curious, like, before you were really walking with Jesus, were these things that still existed?
Not as heartfelt, but generally yes, because and this is kind of like for me, it's like, where do you find your identity? So for me, when I found my identity as a soldier, I found my identity as a ranger. Anybody who was a ranger was part
of your family.
Right. It was like, it doesn't matter what nationality you are, where you came from, where you were raised, if you had money, it was like, you're part of
one of us.
You're one of us. And God was very kind, and he just took that and he's like, this is why I was showing you this. And this is what, because it really, the body of Christ is the same thing as it, and when you identify as part of that body, it doesn't really matter, because you can be the big toe or the eyelash. You're still part of the same body, and you're part of the same identity, and that identity of being in Christ is really kind of where I put most of that at.
That's cool.
It allows for authority and for structure and for uniqueness and diversity without that affecting value at all.
Right.
Okay, a couple questions before we end. what has been the most difficult part in building those communities in this stage of life that you're in?
To be perfectly honest with you, I think just the difficult part is just stepping out of the box, because honestly, you always like what if and second guess yourself before you actually get in there. And it's scary. It's scary. It's just like anything else that you do, that you've never done before. The very first time that you do it, you're like, oh, I'm totally going to blow this.
Yeah.
And you'll make mistakes. I mean, you're going to, but you're definitely going to make mistakes. And just when you do, you just okay, learn from it and continue along. But stepping out, I think, was the biggest thing.
Yeah, I have to confess, this past weekend, I was at Costco, and I failed so hard, you guys. I was. I'm like so upset about it. I wish I could hit reset and like go back to a previous save or something and just redo this. But I was saving a spot for Molly, my wife. She was getting food. We're at the food court thing. And, the tables are 4 chairs. It's like two kind of little tables with 4 chairs. And, they're kind of small, but they're always packed. If you've been to Costco, you're not finding a seat. So when you do, it's like, are you guys leaving? All right, thanks. I'm taking your spot. So, I did that. I sit down, and I have this whole table. It's just me and my wife. And this young father comes in with his young son, super cute. And he comes in. He's like, hey, do you mind if we share this table? I'm like, oh yeah, sure. But for some stupid reason, I just was like, don't say anything. And it was like, I don't know why, because that's the exact opposite. This is a perfect opportunity. God just handed me this opportunity to talk to this guy and his son. We're both young gentlemen, and I just sat there, and it was inside my heart was the spirit was say something. What are you doing? But it was I just sat there, and it was so awkward. And he's having a conversation with his son. He seems like a really great guy, and it was he got up to get napkins, and his son's sitting there, and then his son started talking to me, and so it was okay, what's up? And he finally came back, and it was finally I was this is after 10 minutes. This is a long time of just awkwardness. Maybe it was 7 minutes, but. And so finally I'm like, oh, he's oh, he's not bothering. And we kind of had a little conversation, and then Molly came, and then, they left. But it was I feel like I wasted that opportunity. Totally. I totally did. And so when you're saying that's the most difficult thing, I agree.
It's literally stepping out because
totally.
Because once you broke the ice, you were well, that wasn't so bad.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you could have just had more conversation, and it could have just gone. But it's literally getting started.
Yeah. And so I agree. That's so difficult. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. I wish I could go back. Maybe I'll go sit in Costco cafeteria again or something.
Yeah. I guess 2 notes about, because we're talking about, from the different perspectives, last week being a more younger, this week being a little older, for those who are listening who are of the older category, I hear so many younger people tell me how they would love a relationship with someone who's older than them. That the relationship that so many youth have to their youth leaders, they're like, I wish I had someone like that now, who just, I knew was praying for me, was just, in a healthy, good relationship of just oh yeah, I know them from home group, or I know them from serving, and it's someone who's, in my corner, who has my best interest in mind, who is just part of the body of Christ, who's, looking out for me. And so those of you who are older, I encourage you, young people do want that. I think sometimes the barrier is just this feeling oh, well, they don't want to hear from me. They don't want to, I'm old, what, those whippersnappers, they don't care. Right. Or, it's just awkward and weird, because it is. And for those of you who are younger, I can definitely say that a lot of people who are older feel exactly the same way. They wish they had more relationships with people who are younger, and, could almost revitalize their own, enjoyment and desire for life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a two-way street. But personally, since we talked about younger and now older, and I realized we didn't really add in the flavor of like kids and stuff like that. I know one of the things that Alicia and I have had to adjust over the years is it used to be so easy. We were always around people. First married until kids, we would have people over. We would stay out until past midnight. We would just do all the things with all the people, and it was great because we could accommodate any generation, any stage of life, and we could just like be around them, right? And then we had kids, and we could no longer just stay out for super long periods of time. We could no longer, it was hard to find babysitting because of finances, stuff like that. And so we had to adjust. And I just encourage you, as you adjust to different stages of life, don't let that be an excuse to just pull back.
Yep.
That it just means it's different. It doesn't mean you're suddenly exempt from community because you have a spouse and have kids. They're my community. It's like, well, they're a small community, yes, but like you are called as the greater body of Christ community. And so it's changed. Now it looks like having people over more often than going out with people. It's changed to finding opportunities. Alicia's sometimes gone grocery shopping with people, or been like, hey, we're gonna be at the park. Cool. Do you want me to set the park? It's changed in a lot of different ways, but it never excuses you from community.
And sometimes it's just bringing someone along.
Yeah.
It's sometimes just bringing somebody along. What, Gabriel, for you, kind of there's the last little bit here. What do you have any tips? Like you said that was really hard, but what are some tips in building community?
Yeah, what would make the difficult thing easier?
Just taking that first step. I mean, honestly, just breaking the ice is really that's the hardest part. And once you get past that point, the rest of it is just starting and continuing the conversation after that. Don't be afraid of failure, because
that's a good one.
Honestly, we're gonna mess up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, we're broken.
Costco cafeteria moments.
But I mean, now you can look back at that and you can be like, well, I should have taken the opportunity to be more bold. And now, and I bet you if the same scenario presents itself,
I certainly won't want to make that mistake again.
Right. And that's kind of like you learn from it. So it's...
I've never thought about it in context of building community, but I used to teach like evangelism classes, and that was like a really big thing for me. And one of the things we'd always talk about is that there's no such thing as a failed evangelism. That that we are called to obedience, not success. And as we don't save people as Jesus, we simply give opportunity and share the gospel. That every single time you do it, it's by default success. And I think the same thing is true here, that by default, it's success. Now, it may be varying levels of success. You may find your new best friend forever, or you may be rejected and have it not go well.
Yeah, but
it's always success in the sense of you were faithful to obey.
Yeah.
You reached out in community. Maybe, they were blessed, you were blessed, you learned something from it. Like it's always a win.
Yeah.
And so it's always worth it.
But it requires you to do it. Like you can't, it's like the Wayne Gretzky quote, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So that's good. I appreciate you coming on, Gabriel. Thanks. I love having you on. Hopefully we'll have you on again sometime soon. And thank you so much for listening and coming alongside us and joining us with this conversation about community that we've had this past month. I really think we've covered it well. I think you said it. My favorite word. Intentional. And so I think that is so important in not only building community, but just walking with Christ, like having our walk with him it requires us to be intentional. And so really thank you for joining with us, and don't let this be the end. Don't let this month of community be, okay, I got my community out of the way. No, this is like a stepping stone to what Gabriel is saying. Is break the ice, start living out what it means to be a community builder, living in community and building relationships. It's not only going to be sweet for you, it's going to be sweet for the community as a whole. Excited next week, right? We start, we're going to be starting Advent. And I am really excited. I've never really even gone through Advent myself. So I'm going to be learning some things, and I'm super excited. So join us next week as we are going to be covering through the month of December. It's December for us, is Advent and walking along what that looks like. So Thanks again for being here. Thanks for joining us. And as always, God bless.